everyone. Welcome to our fourth Lunch and Learn. Here we are. So as usual, just a few housekeeping notes to begin with. If you're interested in participating and presenting at a future Lunch and Learn, please let us know. We're always looking for more people to be able to present at these so we can learn about each other's work. You can always message Marisol to be a future presenter. We can open it up to themes and discussions that you'd like to have with IRP partners. So it's not just limited to only presenting on your project. Also, of course, a push here for the principles focused evaluation. So still seeking participation in Katie's survey. And the participation to date has been lower than anticipated. So folks on the call who are IRP partners can send the survey to anyone in the organization who's got some familiarity with the IRP program. And just to remind us all, there is a draw for one of three $50 gift cards to Goodness Gift, Amazon, Indigo, or Starbucks, and the winner gets to decide. So that's exciting. Oh, and a note from Katie. Fantastic. Thanks for putting that into the chat, Katie, about where the survey is. So prior to starting, I just want to recognize that I am situated on Indigenous land where I am, as we all are. Many of you are located on different lands than me, and I also acknowledge those First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, including the ongoing struggles in the face of colonialism, complicated relationships, and actions required in moving forward in true reconciliation. Personally, though, I'm located in Toronto, the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, amongst many others. This area here is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, representing the many nations coming together, living on, respectfully, using resources together on this land in the spirit of cooperation. Everywhere we are in Canada, we can root ourselves in this deeper understanding of what comes before us and traditionally towards these lands and waters where we do live. And then note about questions during the presentation. So feel free to post questions in chat or save them to the end so we can have lots of space for our presenters to be able to discuss. And we'll definitely leave room for questions towards the end of that. And so today we have a really exciting Lunch and Learn. The format's a little different, and it'll be a conversation between two IRP partners. We'll be discussing scaling because the definitions of social innovation vary. Different approaches to scaling have emerged. So we're excited to delve more into the topic with Martine and Elizabeth today. So first up, kicking off our Lunch and Learn will be Martine Project from TIESS. TIESS contributes to territorial development in Quebec through the transfer of knowledge that equips the social and solidarity economy organizations with the tools to face societal issues in innovative and transformative ways. Driven by a passion for social justice, Martine has been involved for several years with associations that support refugees and has continued this involvement through her studies. With a PhD in political science, she specialized in the study of public policy on migration and conducted her investigations in several international fields. She then pursued her career in research, public policy analysis, and for charitable organizations. Her desire to actively participate in the social and ecological transition to get involved with actors in the field naturally led her to join the TIESS team as a project manager. Next, we'll hear from BiSocial Canada. BiSocial Canada is advancing and promoting social procurement by bringing socially driven purchasers and enterprise suppliers together, building business relationships that generate social benefits to communities across the country. Today we have Liz Chick, or Elizabeth, or we're by Liz, right? Liz joining us, who's the Executive Director at BiSocial Canada. Liz's experience expands frontline roles in communities, consulting for the public sector, and working with social enterprises in the UK and Canada. Liz understands the importance of cross-sector collaboration in harnessing the power of purchasing to build healthy communities. As Executive Director at BiSocial Canada, Liz coordinates and connects BiSocial Canada's work with public and private sector purchasers, including all levels of government, corporations such as SAP or SAP, and Chandos Construction to design, implement social procurement and community benefit agreement policies and practices and the BiSocial Pledge. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our presenters today, Martine and Liz.
Merci, Susanna. I'll share my screen right away. We've prepared our presentation, so we'll start with that. Thank you also for introducing our organization. I'll just briefly just go over what the TIESS does for those who are maybe a little bit less familiar with our work. So it stands for Innovative Territories in the Social and Solidarity Economy. We are based in Quebec, and the material that we produce, I think, can be useful for everyone, basically. So we have three main mandates in our organization. So we're based in Montreal, maybe, and we have an office now in Quebec. I'm located at the office in Quebec, and we have three mandates. So the first one is related to monitoring and watch. So trying to highlight innovations relevant to social economy and territorial development through our monitoring activities. And then we are a liaison organization, so facilitating bridges between academia and field experts in the social economy, working together to create new knowledge. And finally, our last mandate is to find the best strategies to transfer this knowledge, aiming for its appropriation in order to transform the practices of organizations on the field mostly. Our work on scaling, and this is what, so I'm a project manager of the TIESS working specifically on the topic of scaling. We started working on the topic of scaling in 2015. So right now, our project that is currently supported by the IRP is really our third phase of the project on scaling. And the initial aim was to stimulate social economy enterprises to take action in order to increase their social impact. So we wanted to make information and support available and more sustainable by strengthening the expertise of the ecosystem, the social economy support system, what we call here the accompanying partners, and also the social economy enterprise themselves, of course. So we've produced a guide, so the one that you see in the middle of the screen, a guide explaining the different concepts relevant to scaling, as well as the different strategies that one can use in order to achieve scaling. And that led also to the creation of a manual dedicated to the social franchising, which was one of the strategies that we initially focused on. Just recently, we published for the organizations supporting SPOs in their journey to scale. So we've produced a toolkit dedicated to them, so with different tools to help them accompany along the way, raise awareness on the topic of scaling. So I'll let Elizabeth present the work that Bisocial Canada does on that topic as well.
Thanks, Martine. So nice to see everyone. Apologies in advance for any muting. I have a really awful cold right now. I don't want to subject you all to coughs, so apologies for any pauses. And just before starting, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you all from the unceded traditional ancestral territories of the St'át'imc Nation here in BC. And Bisocial Canada is a national organization with the mission to support the development of a social value marketplace. And a social value marketplace is made up of these three components that really shift the marketplace from being a tool or a system of extraction to a tool or a system to transform our communities, and that really recognizes the power of the marketplace to build social value in our communities. So there's three key elements of the social value marketplace. Social enterprises, the supply side, and a shout out to Goodness Gift for the survey. For anyone who's not aware, they are a social enterprise. So nice to have that as an option to support the social value marketplace if you complete and win the survey. And social procurement, which is the demand side of the marketplace, so leveraging a social value from our purchasing and investment. And social value finance, so supporting the supply side of the marketplace to grow, expand, scale, and deliver in the marketplace. And so if we go to the next slide, Bisocial Canada's work on the demand side of the marketplace is in supporting social procurement. So we create tools and resources that are all available open source. We support organizations across the country in developing policy, implementation frameworks, analyzing supply chains to look for those opportunities to input and leverage social value through purchasing from social enterprises and other social value suppliers or social purpose organizations. So if we go to the next slide, what this looks like on the demand side is working with a whole range of organizations, including government. So for example, the federal government now with a social procurement policy, municipalities across the country developing social procurement, benefit-driven procurement policies, institutions like BC Housing and University of Toronto, and corporations from, as was already mentioned, international organizations like SAP and J&J through to a lot of organizations in the construction sector, non-profits, all purchasers, all with the opportunity to develop social procurement policies and practices. And so we like to use this social procurement journey as the sort of guide for what successful social procurement looks like. So that includes learning about social procurement, developing policies and implementation frameworks, measuring both what we're currently doing, but also looking at the possible outcomes from our social procurement practices, testing and doing through pilots and long-term implementation, and then leading in social procurement as well. And so that's the demand side of the marketplace. And if we go to the next slide, as I mentioned, a key part of that is really the open source, accessible education about what social procurement is and how as purchasers all the way from individuals through to the federal government spending billions of dollars a year, there is an opportunity to implement and leverage social value through our supply chains. And that requires suppliers. So we can see, for example, we have the guide to social procurement. We also have the supplier's guide to social procurement. Because as I mentioned, the social value marketplace requires a strong social value supplier to create that social value marketplace. So if we go to the next slide, Biosocial Canada also specifically works with social enterprises. So these are businesses with a social, environmental, or cultural mission that reinvest the majority of their profits back into that mission. And Biosocial Canada has a nationwide certification program for social enterprises. Anyone who is looking to purchase from social enterprises like Goodness Gift can find the directory of certified social enterprises on our website. And social enterprises provide everything from catering, cleaning, construction, all the way through to being extended healthcare providers like Green Shield Canada. And so as well as certification, Biosocial Canada does provide consulting support, 2 hours of consulting support to all of the certified social enterprises. So again, as we start to look at how we can be supportive in the marketplace, develop that ability to deliver on those social procurement opportunities and grow, expand, and scale. And if we go to the next slide, beyond that, for a number of years, Biosocial Canada has provided social procurement readiness training. So this is available to social enterprises and other social purpose organizations, and recognizes, again, that in order to deliver as a supplier, there needs to be the ability to understand what procurement is, to respond to procurement opportunities, to understand the opportunities to look, for example, at consortiums working together, growing and expanding capacity to deliver on these procurement opportunities. So Biosocial Canada has, again, open source tools on our website, the super PDF, as well as offering virtual courses in procurement and storytelling. And specifically through the IRP, if we think about that other area of the social value marketplace, is social value finance. So through our role in the IRP, Biosocial Canada has been delivering the Seal the Deal grant program, which is sort of the last mile to the contract. One of the barriers that's been identified is that often procurement opportunities need to be responsive and there needs to be a quick turnaround. You know, I'm sure we're all aware, having responded to bids probably in the past, the turnaround time usually isn't that long. And so what we're finding is that this was a responsive opportunity, low barrier opportunity for social enterprises and social purpose organizations to apply for funding under $15,000 that would help lead to a direct procurement opportunity. And so some of the things that we've been able to fund is a vehicle. So for example, a social enterprise that had the opportunity to scale up onto a larger contract, but needed support in purchasing a vehicle to deliver on that. Through to inline blenders, feels like our team is experts currently on inline blenders. We've had lots of back and forth on what one was needed for that opportunity. Through to support in understanding how to respond to an RFP and consulting support to fill out and respond to an RFP. So Martine, maybe I'll hand back to you. We've spoken kind of what we do and how that fits into scaling, expanding and growing, but it would probably be helpful to also speak a little bit more to what we actually mean by each of those. So maybe Martine, you can kind of kick us off with how we're defining these concepts of scaling, growing and expanding in the social value marketplace.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. I happen to have a little video I'd like to share that we found that we produced a few years back in English. So it's a minute and a half, but it explains a little bit our understanding of what scaling means in the social economy and how it distinguishes itself from the capitalist economy. So if I'd like to start the video, let me know, Liz. I'll be looking at you. If it doesn't work, then I'll be able to send the link. But we tried it and it worked the last time. So do you see the video?
Thinking big.
No, we can
Not
hear it,
yet.
but we can't see it. Maybe you have
I'll
to
stop the
stop
sharing
sharing.
and start it again. Yes, with the proper one. So it's a
Yes.
quick video, but it's well done to
It's always more difficult when it's live. Worked fine when we tested it the other day.
right.
Perfect. We
So
can see
now
it now.
you can see it. Hopefully you can hear it well. I'll start it. Let me know, Liz, if there's a problem.
Social economy is far from obvious. When we talk consortiums, acquisitions, or diversification, we immediately think of the traditional economy and the most aggressive aspects of capitalism. But since the ambition of social economy enterprises is to serve the common good, scaling up can be a good choice. Scaling up can increase the impact of an organization on its members and the community. And it can also be an interesting approach to creating jobs and attracting new financial resources. But what exactly are we talking about? In some cases, it is a matter of pooling resources and expertise. The consortium, for example, makes it possible to carry out larger projects, but also to bid on public contracts. In other cases, the winning formula is shared to be replicated in other territories. This is called social replication. Scaling up can also be achieved through a cooperative arrangement between two different but complementary organizations. By joining forces, they can offer services to the public that they could not provide on their own, and thus increase their impact. There are more than a dozen strategies for scaling up. Want to know more? Contact your social economy advisor and consult the guide on scaling up, available for free on the TIESS website.
I'll go back to the presentation, but I feel that it's a good start. It's a good way to distinguish the concept of scaling in the social economy from what we usually understand when we talk about scaling. I feel particularly in English, maybe, where it seems to be related to hypergrowth, to this idea of hypergrowth startups, to new technologies, and there's really distinction to make with the field of social economy. So we understand, so from the literature review that we've conducted in our work with social economy organizations, we understand scaling as the deployment of new strategies to increase or sustain its positive impact for its members and society in general. So many organizations are aspiring to grow, but it's rarely in a question of wanting to grow for the sake of growing. Ultimately, the goal of scaling up is really to increase the impact, the benefit from the expertise or ideas developed by the social economy enterprises. SPOs will turn to scaling when they wish to increase their impact to reach more people in their community, or to reach out new people in other territories that are impacted by similar needs, for example. And they can also consider scaling in order to ensure their economic survival, in order to be more efficient and perpetuate their model, for instance. So we operate a clear distinctions between growth, business development, and scaling. So scaling is an evolution of the organization's business model, of its way of doing things, to allow it to generate more impact for its members, the community, or the society in general. Scaling refers to a growth that makes sense. It's not a growth that generates necessarily revenue or increase the workforce. And we talk about scaling instead of growth and business development because it's directly linked to the notion of social impact, while growth and business development refer to the means used by businesses to increase their profitability or their sales. Why scale? So sometimes we see that organizations can consider scaling for a variety of reasons. So often an opportunity will present itself to the organization, suddenly offering new possibilities. We see that in our surrounding, in our community of practice, for instance, we have organizations that have developed a product or a service that is fantastic, that is working really well, that has demonstrated good results. And there's an organization doing similar work in a different city that is interested in cooperating together to develop the model in their community. So in other cases, the organization might experience a new challenge or a constraint that requires it to thoroughly review its model or even reinvent itself. The environment has changed, or the needs of the people that you are usually served are no longer the same. The financial sustainability also of the organization might be threatened. So scaling might be an opportunity in that case. And for others, we see that strategic thinking can actually open the door to scaling. The organization is conducting a strategic planning process that leads to set new ambitions, to project itself on the future based on the impact it wishes to have in the community or more broadly in society. But scaling is not necessarily a solution to getting out of a financial situation. It can sometimes contribute to the organization's sustainability, but it also, in many cases, requires sustainable financial investments to implement. And it's not, I feel that we speak a lot positively about scaling, but it's not a must or a mandatory point in the life of an organization. It cannot be applied in all situations. It can be a good idea as long as it is consistent with the mission of the organization and that the organization has the capacity to complete the scaling process. Liz, how do you view the scaling through your work at Bisocial Canada?
Yeah, I think, Martine, that piece that you're really speaking to about, the why scaling, or like what it is that you're looking to scale, is really interesting in this context and just really different and important to acknowledge compared to maybe traditional considerations of traditional businesses. And so I think really thinking about that blended value that social enterprises and social purpose organizations seek to achieve, which is absolutely a return on investment from a financial sense, is an important consideration. Social enterprises, social purpose organizations are businesses within the marketplace. And when we're talking about growing, expanding, or scaling, we absolutely need to think, is this project needed by the marketplace? Is there a space in the market on the demand side to grow or scale, whether it's growing the size of the contract or scaling and moving into a new community? Is there the marketplace for that opportunity? However, there's also the really important consideration of scaling or growing the social mission or the social value, and recognizing that that is the central purpose of a social enterprise or a social purpose organization. And it's intrinsic, those values are blended. And sometimes an opportunity to grow in a financial sense may harm or may not kind of align with the growth of the social value. And that's a really distinct and important consideration that social enterprises and social purpose organizations take into consideration that traditional businesses may not. And if we go to the next slide, Martine, I think that another way of looking at that, or kind of thinking about that, is that we use this concept of community capital and the fact that social enterprises are looking at developing all of these forms of capital, because healthy communities are, yes, rich in economic capital, but they need to be rich in all of these other forms of capital in order for communities to not just survive, but thrive. They need to be rich in cultural capital, the glue of our communities, the social capital, the healthy physical and natural and built environment, and a healthy human capital, so access to skills and learning and training. And so when a social enterprise or a social purpose organization is thinking about growing, expanding, scaling, how is that going to contribute to the growth of this community capital? And we can see, I'm sure all of us very immediately can name traditional businesses that grow absolutely their economic capital, and not just don't grow the other forms of capital, but grow that to the detriment of our physical capital, grow that to the detriment of a shared wealth in economic capital. And so I think it's a really important distinction to make when we're thinking about what opportunities there are. And I know we're going to get Martine to what we need in terms of supports and readiness internally and externally. But when we're thinking about that, it's really important to recognize that for social enterprises and social purpose organizations, it's really about the why of social value and scaling. And so Martine, I'll hand back to you to chat a little bit more about, beyond the what and the why, sort of some of the models of how for scaling.
Sorry, that's a beginner's mistake on the mute button, but we've been talking about the concept of scaling, but then the how to, and sometimes it's even a lot of social economy enterprises that we work with operate scaling strategies without knowing that they are actually scaling. So that's kind of interesting. We've through our work in the guide, we've distinguished different strategies that are mobilized by social economy organizations willing to scale that answer to different objectives. And this is really the objective that they set for themselves, is what is going to influence the strategies that is going to be mobilized in order to achieve it. And sometimes it can be more than one strategy at once. So it's not, and it can be sort of a hybrid model. But to make it simple, we've divided them into three main objectives to which they answer. The first one is to enhance or consolidate the offer that the social economy enterprises has. And the strategies that we've identified are the cooperation between two or more organizations, diversification of our products or services, the merger or the acquisition takeover of other organization in order to achieve so. And if I can just give one example, we were working last week with an organization established in Quebec City that has been in place for almost 30 years now. And they have operated all of these strategies over the years because they wanted to always keep up with their mission. So it's an organization that offers meaningful, decent, professional opportunities to people living with disabilities. And in order to do so and to be able to always reinvent themselves, they've diversified their services over the years in order to employ more people living with disabilities and fulfilling their mission. But they were also, they did a merger just recently in order to save an organization that was not doing so well, but that had similar values. But because they had been in place for so long and they have diversified their activities and now it's a solid organization, they were able to lead with the merger and take over the workers that were within this organization that was in difficulty. So it was they put together all these strategies in order to really increase the impact of their mission. Another sort of objective that we've identified is the one for the strategies related to wanting to replicate a winning recipe in other territories, for example. This is something that we see quite often. So it can be done through two different main strategies, dissemination or replication. And we've talked before, so Liz was showing the different guides that we have. If an organization, that's why it's not necessarily related to growth concerns. Dissemination can be for an organization to let in open access the recipe to their model in order to influence others in other region of the world, of the province, for instance, to be inspired and to apply a similar model in order to change things at a larger level, so to have a positive impact. So this is one way to replicate our model, but it can also be done through replication. And replication involves more or less control in the way that we want to replicate our model in a different territory. We can think of the Renaissance thrift shop in the Montreal area that are really big now, but that started originally as one store aiming to do, again, professional integration of people far from the labor market that is now operating. I think it's over 17 stores, really big name that has an ecological concern also, really strong in its mandate, and that has been able with its scaling strategy to have more influence also in the sector and to be able to change things. And we see that there are also strategies related to the objective, the larger objective to just change the system. So aiming for systemic change. And we're looking at avenues for action at a systemic level. So the sort of strategies that will be put in place are the creation of alliances, for instance, a network. We can think of what was done in Quebec a long time ago now, but with the creation of the universal daycare system. So the idea was to change the public policy on daycare to make it universal, accessible to everyone, and through social economy enterprises that are each daycare, what represent each daycare that have been put in place that are part of this larger network. As for the how to, so we have the strategies, but we've identified different steps that are involved in the scaling process, and it's a long process. So it's not something, it's just as risky as the launching basically of an organization. So there is just as many risks and as much planning, I think, that is necessary to do. So we've identified the steps and explained in the guides a little bit how to approach each of these steps. So the first one would be detecting and raising awareness on the opportunity to scale, looking at whether there's a favorable ear on the idea of scaling within the team and the governance board, for instance, and then engaging in a strategic planning related to scaling. What would it involve? What are the risks associated with scaling? And then go on with elaborating the project of scaling, finding the right strategy, thinking about what it means in terms of recruitment, resources, financial resources, and so on. And that leads us to the next step, which is planning the deployment of the project. So planning the implementation and finally implementing the project. For each of these steps, we've identified in the guide the actions that are to be thought and put in place by the organization, but also by the support system. How can an organization that is an accompanying partner, as we call them, someone working in economic development, for instance, in a region, can help at each of these steps, the social economy enterprise, move along and have the right question and prepare itself properly in order to have a successful scaling process. Liz, I'll let you continue on that question.
Yeah, thanks, Martine. You keep on ending up on the exact perfect piece as well, because I was going to say you kind of spoke to that internal and that external readiness. And yeah, I agree. I think in terms of those elements that are needed to grow, expand, and scale, there's that internal strategy and reflection on what the appropriate model for growth, expansion, or scalability is. And I don't need to repeat them all. You did a really great job at kind of walking folks through what those different models may be. And I think, again, thinking back to why or what we're trying to scale, for some organizations, that actually means almost growing smaller to expand. So for example, a social enterprise that works with folks who face multiple barriers to employment had an opportunity to grow their financial revenue through some of the products that they produce, but identified that actually that was going to require working less with the folks that they were currently working with, and actually employing folks who had less barriers to employment in order to be able to deliver at that scale. And that just wasn't what they wanted to do. They exist to have that social mission to work with folks who face multiple barriers to employment. And so for them, expanding their social value was not taking on that opportunity. On the flip side, there's other social enterprises who, again, Martin was saying, sort of have that winning model or winning recipe that they've identified is able to be taken into other communities. And so for them, the sort of internal strategy was looking at what model did they need and what supports would they need to build into that process in order to scale from one community into another. And that requires external ecosystem support. So when we think again about that social value marketplace, it requires access to opportunities with purchasers. In order to expand or scale, there needs to be purchasers who are recognizing the value of social procurement and putting that into practice, and more generally, who are purchasing what you're selling. There needs to be accessible business development support. So as Martin spoke to, we can create these tools and resources, but traditionally, I think we're all very aware that traditional businesses receive a huge amount of external business development supports in order to be able to sustain and grow within the marketplace. And there also needs to be appropriate financing resources. And usually in order to grow, expand, or scale, whether that's taking on a larger contract or whether it's scaling into another community or collaborating with another social enterprise or social purpose organization, there needs to be appropriate social value finance that recognizes absolutely the financial return on investment, but also the social return on investment from that expansion or growth.
This is really interesting, Liz, and I think we'll be getting there a little bit later, but we see that there are facilitating conditions that we've identified in order to scale, so successful conditions for scaling. And we see that a lot of them rests on the shoulders of the social enterprise or the social economy enterprise. So, for instance, the commitment of all stakeholders has been identified as one, of course, condition of success for scaling. A strong governance, a favorable and stable economic situation, a solid network of partners, and the capacity to mobilize human and financial resources. But Liz, I'll jump right away to the obstacles to scaling, because I feel that what you've talked about really sets the table to these issues as well. There are different obstacles to scaling. We see that, a part of them are relevant to the organization. So there might be a lack of capacities, of strategic planning, for instance, and inefficient and insufficient partner network. The organizational culture might be an obstacle to scaling, because there might be a culture where it's not seen in a positive way to envision development of the activities, or they understand it as growing. While it might not involve so much control. It might just be leading others to get inspired by the model that we've developed, so that others don't have to reinvent the wheel for the exact same problems. When we have something that's successful working for us, so we might just share. That could be a way of scaling. So we see that organizational culture might be an issue, governance issues, and the issues related to the business model viability and profitability issues. But additionally, there are obstacles to scaling that are outside of what the organization can do. There are obstacles that are related to the environment, to the context. If the economic conditions are not favorable to scaling, there are industry challenges. The government support might be lacking. We see here a lot of issues related to the labor shortage. If we want to replicate our model into a region where there's not enough qualified human resources to be able to implement the project, well, that might just be a serious obstacle to the scaling ambition. Then there are issues and obstacles related to the support ecosystem that we have, the social economy support ecosystem. And as you said, Liz, there is a lot of support available for businesses in general, for business development, economical development in different regions. But in terms of social economy, we do have quite a strong system in Quebec, but still there is some lack of expertise dedicated to scaling and lack of services dedicated to scaling. There's a lot of support for the launching of new social economy enterprises, but then for consolidating our activities or for scaling, going abroad, doing things differently, well, when we're 3, 5, 10 years into operation, there's not that much support or expertise to to accompany them into that journey. So that's something that can be an obstacle. The uncoordinated network of support, if we're planning to replicate our model into a region where there's no accompanying partners, or the resources are not the same, that might definitely be an issue. And lack of dedicated funding also related to scaling. So again, a lot of programs related to launching of new opportunities, but to scaling there's a little bit less. Not only there's less opportunities, but there's difficulties in access also. If there's thematic funding, for instance, it might not apply, and there might not be a lot of opportunities in that sense. So that can definitely be an issue. Liz, did you want to continue into the challenges and the obstacles faced by when scaling?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what you're saying, Martine. I think, again, kind of going back to those three key elements of the social value marketplace, one of the elements, starting with Bisocial Canada's focus on social procurement, being the demand side being there for social enterprises and other social purpose organizations. And this traditional recognition of lowest cost being best, or economic value over the overall best value. I did mention that we are seeing a lot of momentum in this area, which I think is really awesome. We are seeing, I mentioned, the federal government with social procurement policy, with the Community Employment Benefit Initiative, municipalities, institutions, corporations, all recognizing that there is a social, environmental, cultural impact of their spending and the development of social procurement policies. I think the next step to that is growing the practices and leveraging the policy into practice, what that looks like in terms of implementation frameworks, the tools that are needed, and also looking beyond the direct supply chain. So also looking at how do we tap into those tier 2, tier 3 opportunities as that leveraging snowball effect is created through the development of social procurement policies. But thinking about the supply side, so social enterprises, other social purpose organizations, I agree, Martine, we're just kind of speaking to this, that there are a whole range of business supports available, but they're very much focused on that financial return and the development of business models focused on financial value considerations. And when we're really thinking about that intrinsic blended value that exists for social enterprises and other social purpose organizations, we really need to have unique or specific or expertise in that area in order to ensure that social enterprises and social purpose organizations can grow, expand, and scale in a way that reflects why they exist in the marketplace. And at the same time, as well as those business supports, they need finance, they need access to social value finance. And I think, again, there's kind of those two challenges there in the traditional financing in terms of the processes or the rules or the requirements aren't always necessarily accessible to many of the models that we see social enterprises or social purpose organizations use. So, for example, not being accessible to nonprofits, which many social enterprises are. But also, again, fundamentally, what is recognized as the return on investment for that finance as well. And that really being focused on the dollar return, as opposed to some of those more innovative models of recognizing that there is a value in an increased social value return on that investment as well.
This is really interesting, and this is where we're going from. This is kind of the mindset that we have going forward in our project at the moment. So I wanted to just, without going into details into the other objectives that we have of our project, the last one is really interesting, and I feel that we have a lot to hear from you, and we could benefit from exchanges in that sense, because we can do so much in terms of asking organization and making tools for measuring their readiness to scale. There's just so much, as we said before, that can rest on their shoulders. Now we need to co-construct, and this is what we're working on through design thinkings with the partners from the ecosystem, with other partners elsewhere, also by looking at inspirational initiatives elsewhere, can we think of structural support measures that could facilitate scaling in the social economy? So without restraining it, once the organization is ready to scale, do we have what it takes to support that? We see that a lot of the financing support that's available at the moment is, as I said before, when we're in that phase, is thematic. It can be punctual, and it's not necessarily adapted to that particular phase of the project. It can also ask them to develop too quickly. Sometimes we see that finances are linked to condition they will ask for an organization to develop their model into different cities, for instance, into a region, but then there's no support to consolidate that action once it's done. So how do we help them a little bit more in terms of finances, but in terms of developing the expertise of the support network as well, of thinking public policies in social economy to better support scaling when it is envisioned, when it is an ambition of the social economy enterprise, because we see that a lot of the times when it is thought as a project, it means it becomes it has such strong benefit and positive benefit in the community that it should be better supported by our instances. So this is what we're working on at the moment, and this is how we wanted to open the door to the discussion. And Liz, I don't know if you wanted to add something, but this is how we wanted to open the door to this discussion on what can we do to better support social economy and SPOs looking at scaling to improve their impact. So I'll leave the door open for the discussion now. I'll stop the sharing, and Liz, if you want to complete.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Martine. And yeah, I would just agree with you that I think it's really kind of opening up now, last 5-10 minutes. I'd love to hear any thoughts folks have, how we continue this work. Like we said, so much momentum that we're seeing behind social procurement, some of those still gaps and challenges that exist, but the projects we're all working on. Looking forward to 5 or 10 minutes of talking about that a little bit more.
Well, that was an amazing presentation discussion from both of you, Martine and Liz. Just first of all, thank you so much for that. And also you made my job so much easier facilitating with starting off the discussion and posing those questions. So I'm just going to pass it to Meg, who's got her hand up first.
Tina, I wondered if well, this is probably mostly for Liz, but maybe for Martine as well. When I was doing investigation into social procurement and like the social purpose kind of lens, the social purpose transitions of conventional businesses into social purpose organizations, I stumbled upon something that I'd never heard of, which was supplier diversity. And so I'm curious to hear how, if at all, BiSocial has engaged with these like quite traditional and like long-standing infrastructures of supplier diversity, because I had heard of BiSocial and I had been talking to you folks, and then I stumbled upon supplier diversity, and I was like, whoa, this is like blowing my mind. And so I just wanted to hear more about what BiSocial has been doing in that space.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And supplier diversity definitely has like very long-standing strong roots, particularly in the US. And so for a lot of organizations that also then sort of work in Canada as well, there's that element of the consideration of supplier diversity. And like you said, Meg, that sort of relates to folks recognizing that there's value in diversifying our supply chains, to be thinking about how do we bring in organizations generally that are owned or led by individuals who maybe traditionally aren't included in the marketplace. So that could be Indigenous owned businesses, women owned businesses, Black owned businesses, businesses owned by folks with disabilities. And there are many organizations across the country that certify and support organizations led or owned by these businesses. There are also opportunities for individuals to self-identify in that way as well, and to look at how do we support them into entering the marketplace. And so for BiSocial Canada, when we talk about social procurement, we use this concentric circle model. So we really talk about starting with what as a purchaser you're trying to achieve. And so so that could be looking at supporting local communities. It could be supporting newcomers to the community. Many of our communities are facing or experiencing a lot of newcomers, refugees, and immigrants to the community who maybe traditionally aren't included within the local economy. It could be looking at advancing reconciliation and how we include Indigenous businesses in our supply chain. And so we, again, kind of speak to that concentric circle model of centering social enterprise as businesses with a social, environmental, or cultural mission that reinvest the majority of profits back into that mission. So those are the suppliers that we certify and that we work with. But there's absolutely within social procurement, it's really about leveraging a social value based on your social objectives. And so we have the opportunity to work with amazing people like Victor. I don't know if Victor's here. With Setsi, with Narissa through the Black Business Association of BC, with a number of the other, I see Ryan from Afro-Caribbean Business Network. So absolutely within social procurement, I think it's really about talking more broadly about how we leverage that social value through our supply chains. Thanks, Meg.
Great, thanks so much. Martine, did you want to speak to that at all? Should we open up for another question, perhaps?
No, you can open up to a different question.
Sounds great. Anyone else on the floor? Yes, Robin.
Thank you. A great presentation. And I know this was set up almost as like, oh, you would have like different perspectives on this, but I see a lot of convergence between, the experiences that you have both had in I think what we could readily accept as fairly different environments and fairly different ecosystem supports, Quebec versus generally the rest of Canada. But what I'm interested in is because of course, you mentioned that one of the resources that would help this scaling in various situations is that access to financing, that access to capital, which, in IRP, of course, we're a little bit narrowly focused on. And it sounds to me, though, that a lot of your descriptions, the kind of supports that are needed, the kind of way of identifying a social purpose organization that is ready to take that next step, whether they perceive themselves as scaling or not, whether they perceive themselves in this growth category, those that seek accessing to finance for whatever reason need exactly the same kind of supports, it feels like they need exactly the same steps, the various resources, the various strategic planning, et cetera. And I just wanted to ask if maybe it's a bit unfair, but if your general sense is, even if they're not scaling, and in your case, Liz, towards procurement, do you think this applies to all SPOs who are on this readiness journey towards seeking financing, whether they perceive themselves to be scaling or not? And that's for both of you. So jump in, either one.
Martine, I actually missed part of the question, so why don't you go first? And maybe could you repeat the question as you go, Martine? Sorry.
It was a long-winded question. I apologize, Liz. It was just, they say that it's not a question if it has more than 3 sentences or 3 paragraphs. I failed miserably on that. The fundamental question is, do you think that procurement or scaling scenarios, whether or not they are present, any SPO that's accessing financing would need the same criteria of supports, the same criteria of consideration of steps, the same kind of resources and thought process?
Well, for those needing financing in terms of scaling, I have an example that pops into my mind, but we're working closely with an organization through this project that has been in operation for over 30 years. So they do what they do really well. They're very solid. They're very well implemented into their community, appreciated. So they were able to develop their business model throughout the years and have done it very well, and have not required necessarily a lot of funding or support doing so because they had the capacity within the organization to do that. Now their scaling project is much more ambitious, so it takes them to a different level. We feel that it's an organization that they, in their strategic planning, they asked, what else can we do? So where do we want to be in 5-10 years? And they reflected, do we want to be the best in, still the best in what we do in the Montreal area? Do we want to offer the model, because what they do is in the same time professional integration, but also they have a strong ecological mandate, and they decided collectively that they wanted to be more involved in the ecological transition of the province. So they feel that they need to be elsewhere, outside of Montreal. They need to be in all the different cities. So they're starting with slowly with small steps to get to this objective. But now it's requiring for them financial resources that they need now because of this ambitious goal. They do have resources in terms of the capacities, the internal capacities, and in terms of the ecosystem, they also need the support from the regions that are willing to put in place this sort of model. So it's a little bit different, I feel, that from other scaling strategies that we'll see sometimes from the get-go. We have an organization that is starting it small and it sees that it should be relevant, it should be implemented everywhere in the province. We have people coming at us with the same needs, asking for a chance to replicate this model in their community. So there is need for accompanying and for support and for finances. But in that case, I feel that in some cases it can be quite different, because they can be very solid, well implemented, but if they have this ambitious scaling strategy, it might require in that sense a little bit more funding than support that they already have within their organization. That's how I understand it anyways, but I'm open to, I'm sure every situation is quite different actually.
Yeah, and
Thank you so
I think I'd agree, Martine, that there's kind of those two elements we spoke to. So there's the strategic support around the different model that you may use, and the support that might be needed around establishing the strategy of scaling, expanding, or growing, and the support and the business market and the business acumen that's available for that. And then there's the general overarching ongoing being a business in the marketplace and needing that ongoing consistent access to shifting, on a day-to-day basis, the systems that are available in terms of finance and being accessible with social value considerations and to social enterprises on an ongoing basis. So yeah, I think, Robin, to your point, there's both, and there's the very intentional methodology of it and building in a process of support for that. And there's also, in terms of that long-term shift of ongoing sustainability, the shift that needs to happen. So both sort of specific projects being valuable and programs, and how do we shift more generally the considerations to broaden the access of existing programs and funding.
Thank you so much for those questions and the answers. I recognize that we're at time, but also, Rosa, I do see you have your hand up, and I want you to be able to have the opportunity to ask your question. I will say that anyone that does need to leave now, please feel free to, and you can always follow up with your questions in terms of what you may be asking and interested in via the partners portal, which will also have the contacts for everyone, including Liz and Martine. But should anyone have the ability to stay for an extra, I'd say 2 minutes. Is it possible, Martine and Liz, that you could stay for an extra couple? Okay, Rosa, do you have your question?
Yeah, thank you so much for this interesting presentation. I think it's very important for me to try to understand this. I think it's a new framework. We can say scaling. And my question is, because during the presentation, I think Martine speak about the difficulties for social economic scaling. Is a lack of expertise on scaling. at that moment, this means that in this organization, like in a case of NWAC, needs a training about scaling. It's only I want to better understand that when you say lack of expertise on scaling, what that mean, please. Thank you.
I can just answer with an example. We have, for instance, an organization that will be looking at replicating their model of what they do into different regions. For instance, they're looking at a merger. It involves legal consideration. So when we're thinking about merger, and in that case, we have to find the proper support partners that are able to ask the right questions of, okay, what does it mean in terms of governance if you proceed with the merger? What does it mean in terms of legal consideration? What will it mean in terms of mobilizing your team, in terms of human resources or financial capacities that you have to gather for that? So this is mostly considering the types of strategies that are mobilized in scaling. They're kind of different than from launching an organization. So in that sense, it might not be all the ecosystem, the support system in social economy that is comfortable talking about what it means to merge two cooperatives into one, or two not-for-profit organization. So this is what we mean by lack of expertise. And also we see that sometimes the ecosystem in one city, in the cities, is quite largely developed. So you might have really good support, people that are coaches that are working with you in business development to help you have that strategic planning to go ahead. And then where you want to go, in the region where you want to go, you might not have the same how do you say the same ear or the same expertise, the same support from where you want to go. So there is a general lack of expertise in scaling. We feel that the questions sometimes, but again, it's very tricky because the questions sometimes are very related to the industry of where you want to scale. So you're looking at industry leaders or industry experts that could help you scale your model. And in the same time, we have to have this expertise in the field of social economy related to scaling to look at, have you thought about the different strategies that are available to you in order to scale or in order to replicate your model? So this is the sort of thinking that we have in mind when we talked about the lack of expertise.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So with that, I will wrap up today. Thanks everyone for joining, and for those of you who stuck around as well too. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of your week. See you next time. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.